So welcome, everyone. It's really good my name is Jonathan Veach. I'm the president of Occidental. It's really good to see so many of you here, parents, faculty, friends, and most importantly, our students. We're very pleased to have David Plouffe here today as part of our inaugural series that celebrates the Obama Scholars Program at Occidental. We have our first 2 Obama Scholars who have arrived this year. We've also named 3 fellows from our existing pool of Occidental students. We're very, very proud of them. This program was endorsed almost immediately by the president as soon as he heard about it. I was gearing myself up for a long slog, a marathon of trying to get not only his attention, but and then jump through all the hoops. And in fact, there were no hoops. His sister Maya, by the way, Hector was the one who first approached Maya. Hector is a man to be reckoned with at a cocktail party because he saw the opportunity to raise the prospect of the Obama Scholars Program. She loved it. She took it to the president. And here we are. So I'm really thrilled about that. This program is dedicated to the president's most important agenda out of office, which is to cultivate the next generation of leaders devoted to the public good. And its primary focus, though it's not exclusive focus, is on first in family to go to college, military-connected families, and community college transfers. And we chose those particular demographics because the president believes rightly that they are at most at risk in terms of access to higher education. So this has been our focus. We've raised about $10 million thus far. Our hope is to raise about 40 for this program. So this series is meant to not just celebrate the program, but call attention to the program. It will be followed by a program in the spring by Joe Solomonez, who was one of the president's advisors on changing the military policy around Don't Ask, Don't Tell to its present, much more ecumenical policy, as well as the Marriage Equality Act. And our goal is to bring former Obama officials to talk about their own legacy, the president's legacy, and to reflect a little bit about the challenges around making significant change. So I look forward to seeing you again. And David's going to talk probably a little bit more about the upcoming election, which is on, I'm sure, everybody's mind. And here to introduce him is one of our alums, Rob McKay. Rob is a member of the class of 1986. He was a political science major at Occidental, and since then he's worked in fields of philanthropy, politics, and early-stage equity investing. He's also established the McKay Foundation, which for the last 20 years has supported a variety of social justice initiatives, including the promotion of a living wage policy and the expansion of voting rights. So we're very pleased to have him here today. Welcome, Rob.
It's nice to get the introduction of the introducer. But thank you, Jonathan, for that. And I'd like to, this is a new experience for me to be part of this committee, and I'm thrilled. And I think the first public thing I'd like to do as a member of this committee is acknowledge Sharon and Noah, the Obama Scholars, and really congratulate them as part of the program. So I do have the great pleasure of introducing David Plouffe, and obviously, as Jonathan suggests, a really important time to be having this conversation. David currently is the head of policy and advocacy for the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. I'll say more about that in a moment. Many of you know that for the past 25 years, David has developed strategies and worked to bring people together around a range of common causes and issues. He's worked on many successful campaigns. The one that, frankly, I'm the most grateful for, and maybe many in this room are as well, is the election of Barack Obama in 2008. David then went to serve as a senior advisor to the president in the White House for several years during the first term of President Obama's 2 terms in office. The format today is going to be an interview, questions conducted by our own Peter Dreyer, who you all know, and Hector De La Torre, who Jonathan introduced as well. And then an open mic where we get a chance for all of you to ask questions of David. I wanted David to not take us right into the weeds here. So I thought it might be useful if we started maybe more at 35,000 feet, and that means I'm going to ask you not a yes or no question, but rather, I think this is something, I've had my sleepless nights about this, and I wonder if I'm not the only one in the room. 2008, we had hope and change. By 2016, we had Make America Great Again. What happened? And by that I mean not a critique of a successful or unsuccessful presidential campaign, but rather as context setting for this critical midterm election that we're entering in, and the conversation that the three of them will have in a few minutes. I think it would be helpful for us, David, if you could give us a sense from your perspective, both in the White House for a number of years, but now in the private sector, how we find ourselves at this moment in the country, and what that means for our own political work and for where we go from here. So, David, I'd love to have you lead off, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Rob, for that introduction and your great partnership and support in the Obama journey. And it's great to be here at Occidental. Mr. President, thank you for inviting me. This Occidental is a really important moment in the Obama journey. And so I've spent a lot of time in the LA area, but I've never been here to campus. So it actually was, I saw the plaque and the Obama steps, and it's really, what's interesting is during the Occidental exploration, someone called a proctological exam we go through in a presidential race, people were convinced that something must have happened here. Why would he leave? And is this where the jihadist plot was concocted? So we spent a lot of time with people convinced that we were hiding some great state secret, but obviously this was a really important part of his life. Couldn't be more excited about the Scholars program. I got a chance to meet some of the scholars and fellows earlier, and it gave me great optimism as they talked about their desires and hopes, and so I think this program is just tremendous. Oh, sorry, do we have some? Oh, get it a little closer. Oh, look at that. Just a tremendous program, and you're all great to be here, and I think thinking about what these folks are going to do out in their communities around the world to bring about change could not be more exciting, and it is so core to Barack Obama's philosophy about change is not going to come from folks at the top. It's going to come from particularly young people making their mark, and if we can make sure a few folks who might not have opportunity to do so have the opportunity to go out there and organize for change and build great businesses and get involved in government and public service, it's great. I mean, listen, we could be here literally till like November 2020 with that question. I don't. So just a couple top line thoughts. I think that, generally in history, particularly after a two-term president, a lot of voters are not looking for a replica. They're looking, so obviously you look, George W. Bush, different in many ways than Bill Clinton. Barack Obama, very different than George W. Bush. That's part of it. We live in a closely divided country. So Donald Trump won the election by the rules that we have embedded in the Electoral College, but he still got 46.1% of the vote. I think the worst a Republican presidential candidate can do these days is probably 44.5 or 45. So we live in a divided country. Democratic floor is a little higher than that, but not much higher. So it didn't take much. So I think a few things. I'll just talk electorally. I think if you look back on it, obviously there were events. Jim Comey's episodes throughout the campaign and how the media focused on it. But at the end of the day, I think there was not the same Democratic enthusiasm you'd like to see in all parts of the country. So turnout in Florida was probably what you would have liked. Actually, turnout in Philadelphia was not quite what you liked, but pretty good. But not good in other parts of Pennsylvania and really bad in places like Detroit and Wisconsin, and Milwaukee. So Democratic turnout wasn't as high as you would have liked everywhere. And then there were these so-called Trump-Obama voters. They exist. And there was enough of them that said, so you say, well, okay, how could they vote for the black guy named Barack Obama from Chicago and then vote for Donald Trump? But you got to remember, they're both outsiders. And they both won the campaign within a campaign for who those voters thought would go to bat for them. Like, why did Obama won re-election with the highest unemployment rate any president's ever won re-election. Why was he able to do that? Because all the models suggested he couldn't. You know, Nate Silver gave our chance of election about a year out from 12 at about 30%. Well, because he won the debate for voters in Wisconsin, Ohio, and Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and Roanoke, Virginia. They're like, you know what? I don't agree with everything, but he's going to fight for people like me. When he's had a decision for, like, the call goes for, you know, the connected or the average person, he's going to do it for the average person. Trump won that debate. And we can ask why, but people had a sense that he was the outsider and he was going to fight for the forgotten worker, and he was kind of the blue-collar success story. We know a lot of that's fraudulent, but he sold it and people bought it. So when I think it ended up being much more of a change election than I think anybody thought. Certainly than I thought. It became as big a change election as we'd seen since '08, one of the biggest ones in presidential history. And there was only one change candidate in the race. So obviously this race came down to 70,000 votes in 3 states. So, you know, had Comey not come out in those last 10 days, Clinton probably would have won. If the last debate had been 5 or 6 days close to the election, Clinton probably would have won. But at the end of the day, my view on these things is there's nothing more important than who we elected as a president. Everything that happens in this country, and you could argue many things around the world, depend on that decision. Are wars fought or not? Do we have cooperation with the rest of the world on things like disease and climate change or trade, or do we not? Do we have more people with health care or less? Do we fund education more or less? Like, this to the young people out there, students, I get it. You look, well, you don't turn it on your TV. You look on your smartphone, and you're like, what a bunch of, you know, this is horrible. Politics is ugly, and it's small, and it can be unimaginative, and there's a lot of exciting candidates this year, but sometimes there's not as many exciting candidates. I get all that. But you have to understand, everything that's going to happen in your life that affects you is because of who we elect. Because who we elect, they then have the steering wheel. They have the agenda. And so I look back on 16, and there's a lot of what-ifs, could-haves. But at the end of the day, if you believe in the direction your country should take, your state should take, your county should take, your city should take, you got to win the election. You've got to win the election. And so a lot of people in this country, 46% that night, about 40% now, happy with the direction of the country, more people unhappy. And so the only remedy to that is obviously to win elections. We have one coming up in about 23 days. That'll be important, and then the big one in 2020. So, but the other thing I think I would just say, and then we'll jump into the question, is just those states that flipped. The reason nobody thought they could flip is it really did take, if you look at Pennsylvania, it was really hard to step back and say, how can you get Donald Trump over the win line there? Now, he didn't get 50, but he got close enough. And it really, he blew the doors off Republican turnout in a lot of tough areas. Another thing, there are counties that Obama won by 10, 15, or even 20 points that Trump won by 15 or 20 points. There are counties, Erie County, Pennsylvania, many counties in Iowa, many counties in Ohio, that flipped 20 to 30 points. That is unheard of in presidential politics. And some of those were Trump-Obama voters. Some of them were Trump got those voters excited. So he wasn't exciting Republican voters in Orange County here in California, but he was exciting voters in Wapello County, Iowa, and in Roanoke County in Virginia, to the likes of which we've not seen, probably not since Reagan. So anyway, we could talk about this all day, but that remedy replacement thing is really important to understand, and that generally has been a pattern.
So David, I'll take the first question, and then Hector will do the next one. As we've talked about before, Oxy has a program called Campaign Semester, where since 2008, we've had about 105 students that have participated by working full-time for the entire fall semester on a political campaign in a swing district. We have 18 students right now working in 8 states. They come back the week after the election and they participate in a seminar. And what I've also sensed is that there's a lot of students at Oxy and around the country that have shown more interest in politics this year and are doing more door knocking and canvassing. And I'm wondering what your view is about how the millennial and younger generation is going to be doing. Are they going to turn out to vote? Are they going to make a big difference in this election? And how do you how do you keep them involved after? Because I know one of the things that the Obama campaign was organized to do was, even after the election, to keep people involved in politics and not think of November 6th as the end, but the next phase. So.
Well, I learned more today about the program, and it's really tremendous that for 10 years you've had people out working in states and counties and districts, Democrat and Republican, just learning what campaign politics is about. And some of those folks have gone on and built really great careers in politics, and we need that. Politics is not for everybody, campaigns aren't for everybody. But hopefully more and more young people give it a whirl, because again, campaigns are how we govern. They're not just, is a state blue or is a state red? Basically, it's wars, and it's peace, and it's prosperity or it's not. So I'm excited by the energy. I mean, we've seen it before. Obviously, the 60s filled with energy. Reagan actually did a great job of getting younger conservatives motivated, and many of those people still on the scene today. Barack Obama wouldn't have been nominated in 08 without young people, wouldn't have won our re-election in 12 without young people, really under the age of 30. So, and young people are generally counted out. And I think that, listen, right now, if enough people under 29 voted, not at the same levels of people over 65, but just anywhere near what they'd vote in a presidential year, we already know the outcome of the election. Like, you know, young people can determine it. So I see it, you know, in philanthropy where I work now. I see it in folks that are organizing for criminal justice reform, who are organizing for fair economic policies and politics. So we desperately need it. I mean, you know, we don't live in a hierarchical society anymore. People don't have to wait till they get to a certain age to make a difference. And I think it's hard to argue that the sooner people of my generation get off the stage, the better, and put the future in the hands of young people. Because ultimately, you've got to shape the world you're going to own. But I think in a lot of ways, you know, you can argue that what we're doing is not working as well as it needs to. And so I think you see it in people running too. A lot of younger people running, some of them in their 30s, but some in their 20s for office, who are motivated. Some of that's a reaction to the last presidential election. But I think, you know, there's a sense out there, whether it's climate change, whether it's income inequality, whether it's our criminal justice system, that things have really reached a breaking point. And people understand that we've got to push every lever. So some of that's going to be campaigns in politics, some of it's going to be working in government, some of it's going to be doing great academic and think tank work, but I'm excited by it. And it's the most important thing we can do. We need to get you know, the younger part of the millennial generation and Generation Z deeply involved in shaping the contours of their country. And so the other thing I'd say about young people getting involved in politics, I saw this with Obama and some of the other races I've worked on where there was energy. Obviously, the most likely reason a young person, a fellow student, a friend, or a family member of yours, speaking to the students now, will vote or register is because you did. The most likely reason that someone will volunteer is because you did. But the other thing it does, when someone who's 19 or 21 or 22 or 23 is passionate about something, that has an impact on older people in your circle. And so one of the things we tried to do in the Obama campaign was have younger students talk to their parents, talk to their grandparents, and say, this is really important to me. I want you to understand why I'm supporting this person. And it had that was much more impactful than anything we did, much more impactful. So the ability for what you do is bigger than you think it is. And, you know, as we see, like this experiment that we're involved in right now doesn't have to be forever. I mean, if you're an amateur student of history, we'd be the most arrogant society in the history of the planet to think that everything's going to be fine for the next 50 years, 100 years. Like, I hate to be like Dark, but that's true. So, by the way, what we've got right now needs to be perfected, it needs to be changed, but like, it's at risk. It's at risk, and I think that we need young people to get involved and not just help on the periphery, but be the engine of change. And I think young people can, and I think they will. And so I'm excited about it. But I think when Election Day is November 6th, now the presidential election basically starts at midnight on November 6th, so we're not going to get a break. But, you know, you got to stick with it. We've got legislative sessions starting next January all over the country. Congress will be back in session. We'll have off-year elections, special elections, local ordinances and local discussions in city councils. And those things in many ways affect your life's more than what's happening in Washington, so you just got to stay with it. You got to be vigilant. We all need to be Barack Obama, in the last speech he gave in Chicago before he left Washington, talked a lot about what he thought the most important word was in our democracy, and the way he wanted to be known was that as of a citizen. And we've got to earn that, and we've got to, I think, live that in every way possible.
Well, I'm going to be getting down into the weeds of the election. So we know there are 38 Republican seats in the House that are rated toss-up or worse. There are 3 Democratic seats that are rated toss-up or worse. And among the Republican seats, there are 41 with no incumbent. So it's a free-for-all. In the media, you keep hearing these anecdotes or metaphors for a blue wave, a blue tsunami, a blue tornado, a blue riptide. I mean, it's all these dumb analogies. And none of it may come to pass. Nate Silver, just this morning, had it at 84% likelihood that the Democrats take the House. What do you think is going to happen?
I don't listen to a single prediction, or I don't make one ever again after 16. So here's what I'd say, and I'm as removed from electoral politics as I've been in my adult lifetime. So maybe I actually have better perspective. I don't know. So I don't have any secret information. So I'll talk a little bit about some historical perspective, and then obviously I have a lot of friends and colleagues who are deeply involved in the races this year, so I get a sense of what they're seeing. We're going to have an unusually high number of close races. House, Senate, and governor. The governor's races are incredibly fascinating because some of the states that Trump flipped, Democrats are very competitive in, which is unusual because you have incumbent Republican governors presiding over what is perceived to be healthy economies, and they may lose. Hard to find a parallel in recent American electoral history. So a shockingly high number of close races. Dozens, probably, if you add up House, Senate, and governors, we'll have dozens of races on election decided by 4 points or less. And so I think, one question is it a breeze, is it a wind? But it could be that there's strong winds blowing in suburban districts that helps the House, and relatively gentle winds or no wind blowing in some of the red states where Democrats are trying to either win governor's races or Senate races. So historically, historically, the same party tends to win the close races. Things break in a certain direction, but not always. There's about 3 times in the last 60 years where that hasn't happened. We had kind of a split verdict, House, Senate, or federal versus state. And we may be looking at that. I don't know. So the tale of what happens may be very different in the California congressional districts that are at play, some of the northeastern districts, some of the metropolitan southern districts, than what you see in North Dakota, or what you see in Indiana, or what you see in Missouri. So, we're going to know a lot. So Nate's 84% is higher than he had Hillary Clinton's chances. So it tells you he's pretty confident. And most people that I know who are involved in House races are getting more bullish rather than less. I think folks that are working in Senate races are not as bullish. Listen, at the end of the day, some of these folks who are trying to win re-election, it's going to be an act of acrobatic, a miracle acrobatic act to get the 50% of the vote. But they're hanging in there. So all those Democratic red state senators are hanging in there. But, it's a long way from 47 and 48 to 50 in some of those states. So, and the governor's races, I think, continue to look pretty strong. So all I'd say is just it's going to be really close. If you have a particular point of view about who you'd like to win an election, a party or a candidate, get out there, because this is the kind of election where it will literally come down to a vote per precinct in a lot of places. I was talking to a couple of the Obama fellows earlier who were out knocking on doors, and what they found was they ran into people who said, I wasn't sure I was going to vote, what's on the ballot. Like, I can't overstate, particularly in an off-year election, how important it is to have human contact. Because there's a large number of people in every district, in every state, in every county, who need that nudge. They need that nudge, particularly younger voters. So your effort matters in the last 22 days. We will have in a lot of states within about 10 days a pretty good sense of how things are going to unfold in states with a lot of early vote. So you begin to see the contours in states like Florida and Ohio pretty well. The one caveat on that is one of the reasons I was so confident in the last week of 16 was if you just looked at the early vote in states like Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, even Iowa, and Hillary lost Ohio and Iowa by huge numbers. You liked what you saw in early vote. And election day was kind of a disaster in a lot of places. So you got to run through the tape, but you begin to get a sense of the contours of the electorate. Are you seeing surge turnout amongst certain demographic groups that you're either happy about or displeased about? So I would, for those of you that are looking for, like, don't really pay attention to any polls really, but those folks like Nate, Redistrict, Michael McDonald, some of the folks who really analyze early vote, John Ralston does a great job of this in Nevada. Pay attention to that because that stuff matters. But all I can say is I think it's going to be a really, 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 really late night. It may go deep into the week. And here in California, obviously, we have competitive congressional races. We have, I think, really competitive ballot initiatives. And, you know, it may be several days before we know how those unfold, depending on how close they are.
So, David, we have a president who has inspired and catalyzed a lot of activism, groups like, you know, all over the country, like Indivisible, that have been part of what's sometimes called the resistance movement. And there was a fear that people might come out and protest, but they wouldn't translate that into getting involved in the election. But it seems like that's not true, that all those groups, Planned Parenthood, Indivisible, the ACLU, the unions, they're all putting their people in the field. And one of the consequences is that it seems that there's an unprecedented number of women running for office, mostly Democrats, but some Republicans. So it looks like, at least in the House, there will be an unprecedented number of women there. And we have African Americans running for governor in Florida, Maryland, and Georgia. So is this the future of American politics, where more women and more people of color will be elected to office? Or is this just a short-term reaction to Donald Trump?
Boy, I really hope so. You know, particularly after the circus in Washington recently on the Supreme Court, like it's hard to argue that the era of the white man doesn't need to come to an end pretty quickly. It's not working. So I think so. I mean, I think one of the things that makes me most excited about this election, however the outcome is the types of people seeking office. Record numbers of women, candidates of color, but also just average people who are like interesting, normal people who aren't political creatures and who've decided, and some of those are white men too. Okay, they're allowed to. But it's really exciting, and so I expect it'll continue. I mean, I think that's a test. So to your point about activism, people who are active are running the complete race, but they're not going to determine this election. They're incredibly important, but it has to be the people who haven't been active, or the people who are in the middle. Like, do we get enough of them? And then I think as it relates to candidates, you know, there was a surge, no doubt, I think, triggered by 16. But, you know, people, when they see someone like them seek office, it makes it more likely they would seek office. And when they see them win, because a lot of the barriers to running for office is, I don't know how to do this. I don't know anybody in the party. Well, you don't need to know anybody anymore. By the way, Obama and Trump both ran from the outside. It's a good example. Like, you can seek the highest office in the land without a lot of institutional support. But you're going to see all over the country, I think, this fall, people who win general elections who came out of nowhere, who didn't have the fundraising list and didn't have the years in the party, and you don't need that anymore. If you're a compelling person with a compelling message and you excite people, you can build a winning campaign. And that's what's so exciting to me. And when you look at some of these folks who are running for the Senate, running for governor, you know, there was a question, and I have more visibility. I'm sure there's really compelling folks running in the Republican Party too, but I have more visibility in the Democratic Party. And, you know, coming out of 16, one of the natural questions was, wow, our bench is terrible. Like, it was like LeBron and the Cavaliers. It's like LeBron, like, well, now like the bench it's coming. It's right in front of us. And, you know, the truth is that you don't have to wait 20 years to run for governor or president anymore. I mean, some of the people that lose races this year might end up running for president. I won't name names to jinx them, but, you know, you probably know who they might be. So it's great. And so I think we need that energy not just to win elections, but also hopefully to come up with new solutions and new ideas, and people with more pragmatism, and people who aren't there to like do the chess match of like, what's my political career look like over the next 30 years? They're like, you know what, I'm fed up, or I've got an idea, and I'm going to run, and I don't need to be here forever. I mean, we need that so badly. We need people who just say, I'm going in there, I'm going to call it like it is, I'll take the shots, and if I lose in a primary in 2 years, so be it. I mean, you guys all know that. We need it so badly. And I have some hope that some of these people are running because of where they come from, because of their motivation, are going to really be a breath of fresh air. So I really, really hope so.
So digging into the Senate, there are 35 seats up this time. 26 of them are Democrats, so it's very skewed. 10 of those 26 are in states that Trump won. With all of that, Nate Silver says the Democratic chances of getting the Senate are 21%, almost the exact opposite. And if we don't defend all 26, then if the Democrats don't defend all 26, how do you? Then obviously they have to pick up seats elsewhere. What does that lay of the land look like?
Well, one thing I'd say, the Senate's really fascinating, just because if you look at 2020, it's kind of the reverse of this year. So you've got a lot of Republicans who won in 2014, which was a great environment for Republicans, now having to run for re-election, many of them in blue or purple states in a presidential year. Again, a lot can change in 2 years, but it's going to be a really, really good playing field for the Democrats. I mean, the truth is the Democratic Party is at a disadvantage in Senate races just because we have 2 per state. So, if you look at just like based on the states that Barack Obama won in 2012, if you said, okay, we're going to give 2 senators for every, Obama won 26 states, you'd get 52. We had a pretty good election. That tells you, our ceiling now is lower than the Republicans. Is it plausible the Democrats could get to 60? Anything could happen. It's much more plausible Republicans have a path there just because, we don't have, there's a lot of states right now where, like Heidi Heitkamp did win last time. She's running a competitive race. We used to have both Democratic senators, or both senators in South Dakota, for instance, and it's harder, and things have gotten more parted. But so you got to look. I look at the Senate as not just as what happens now, but what's likely to happen. So probably a really good opportunity for the Democrats in 20. So hopefully, if you're a Democrat, you want to win in 18, but you certainly want to keep it close enough so you can win it in 20 if you don't win it in 18. So first of all, the Democrats are going to have to take advantage of some of their takeover opportunities. So you got Nevada, you've got Arizona, and you've got Texas, all in different states of competitiveness based on polls. You got to win one of those, hopefully two. Then obviously you have to keep your losses down elsewhere. And the big question is, do all of our Democratic incumbents somehow make it across the line? Do you lose 1? Do you lose 2? Do you lose 3? Do you lose 4? I think any of those are potential outcomes. We just don't know, because no one's sitting there at 51 or 52 or 53. So even a Democrat that's got a slight lead right now, if they're sitting at 46 or 47, that's a long way to go if those polls are right. So I think you could see anything from, the Democrats actually end up with 50 or 51 to the Democrats being 46, and I think that's just the tail of the tape. And I will say I think our incumbent Democrats have run really great races, because most of them are running in really, really tough territory. And they've kept those races incredibly competitive, and some of them have leads, if you believe polls. And so, it's pretty simple. Minimize losses there, and then you have to maximize. And at the beginning of this election cycle, I think a lot of political pundits thought the Democrats have 0 real takeover opportunities. And now you've got 3, and so that seem real. And and a lot of that's just going to come down to turnout patterns. Can Beto O'Rourke really get the Latino turnout and vote share that he needs? Can Jackie Rosen in Nevada do the type of turnout, that not just Obama got in 2 races he won, but that Harry Reid got when he won in a really tough environment in 10? Arizona is obviously super close, and so, If our candidate there is to get anywhere near presidential year turnout in the Latino community, she's probably going to win. So these are all going to be, again, like I'm not just saying the obvious thing, they're all going to be close. Like these things are going to be incredibly, incredibly close, I think. Unless there's some break at the end. And, you know, politics used to be settled by the summer. It's like nothing's really going to happen. We talk about October surprises. Things are much more fluid these days. And so my hope is that the environment just allows our Democratic candidates to make their unique individual case over the next 22, 23 days in the most effective way they can. And I don't think a big national Democratic message is helpful right now. Let the candidates who are running good races, you know, execute this to the best of their ability in their districts or their states. So it's fascinating. But again, the Senate, and then you look at 2022, not to get too ahead of ourselves, but, you know, you've got Republican senators who won in 16 in states like Pennsylvania, in states like Wisconsin, in some places that clearly will be turnover opportunities. So of the next 3 Senate election cycles, this one is like kind of a sheer rock cliff for Democrats. But 20 and 22 should be much more favorable. And so if you take the long arc, you know, you could like where you end up. But this is going to be really close. And I think those range of outcomes are equally plausible.
And all the more reason for them to continue with cloture in the Senate for the Republicans to keep cloture for these next 2 years, because the shoe may be on the other foot pretty soon after. We'll see whether McConnell does anything in these next 2 years to mess with that.
So I know you don't want to predict, so I'll predict and you react. So let's assume the Democrats take back the House, but not the Senate. They take back the House by 15 to 20 seats. And so Adam Schiff becomes the chair of the Intelligence Committee from here in Burbank and Pasadena. And the Democrats can hold hearings on Trump's taxes, on foreign policy, on all kinds of stuff. They can get his tax returns whether he wants to or not. So on both a positive and a negative, on the sort of negative or defensive fight, do the Democrats have their act together enough to take advantage of that situation, to make the most of, even if they can't win they can't stop Supreme Court nominations and so forth, but in the House they can neutralize any legislation from the White House. And on the positive side, should the Democrats come up with an agenda, try to agree on an agenda, whoever the speaker is, on the minimum wage, on health care, on environment, on the things that are popular, and force the Republicans to vote no for the next election and to sort of lay the groundwork for the 2020 election? Or should they just be, as some people are saying, anti-Trump? Or should they be positive about, this is what we want, this is our vision of America, this is where we want to be in 2020 and in the future of the country?
Well, so first of all, hopefully they're going to think first about governing and not positioning. So I would say there is a really important role for oversight, obviously. And so whether it's tax returns, whether Mueller puts forward things that deserve scrutiny as it relates to impeachment, they need to execute that. But they should, whether it's economic, tax, environment, healthcare, education, if they've got ideas about how to better the lives of the American people, they need to bring it forward, okay? And there may be some residual political benefit because the opposition party rejects things that people want, but the Democratic Party brand is not great right now. And so I think that is really important that folks out there understand, like, okay, what am I getting? By the way, hopefully some new ideas too, because I think a lot of voters tune both parties out. By the way, one of the things, this is underappreciated. Now, Trump did not govern as an outsider. He's governed as a leader of the Republican Party. But one of the reasons he won is people said he doesn't sound like a normal Republican. He takes some positions that are not down the line. They liked that about him. He could have chosen to govern in that way. He didn't. And if he had, he might be in a little different position right now in terms of his popularity. So we need that desperately. So it's a dance, because any of the stuff that is more investigative in nature is going to dominate the media, obviously. And if you pass a piece of legislation 235 to 210 in the House that's not going anywhere in the Senate or can't pass, like, that's going to be less interesting. But we have things like phones now and social media, and we can drive message. So I think it's really important that you have here's what we're going to do to improve people's lives, and we're going to animate that. We're going to talk about it. We're going to pass things. You'll also have presidential candidates out there with our field of 1,000 running for president who can also amplify these things. So hopefully there'll be a sense of like these guys have some new ideas and they're trying to just be for things, not just be against Trump. So that doesn't mean like, you know, the role of and listen, and I think a lot of it will depend on the committee chairs. Committee chairs are of differing views and of differing skills. I have great confidence someone like Adam Schiff is going to handle his responsibility extremely well. So, but it's an interesting question. And I think that's an important mail that the Democratic Party has to answer. Like, what are we for? In a way that's accessible to people, that they understand, that they think that'll make a difference in my life. So, and what'll be interesting, yeah, that if the Democrats win the House, you know, maybe we'll get surprised on the high side, and the margin is quite large. But the Senate margin either way is not going to be large. So, you know, you're going to be, what could get done? Maybe something on infrastructure and jobs. I doubt there's an immigration deal, but maybe you could do something around border security and DACA, you know, which was something that was available last year that the administration turned away. So, but hard to see, you know, could you do some things that is more rational around health care? I don't know. But I can't overstate, and I think this is really sad for the country. Even those of you that are political animals want a break. Like, Trump is deep into his re-election campaign already. Never happened in American political history that somebody is running, raising money, spending money. And pretty much again, maybe it's not 1,000, but it's probably 30 to 35 Democrats will have to make up their decision by election day in the end of January about whether to run. Some will start announcing right away. Like, it's on. It is on. And so we're going to have this presidential campaign hanging over us, not just in 20, but in 19 too. And that sucks up so much oxygen. So that's the other thing the Hill Democrats have to think about. Like, whatever they're doing on the floor in September of 2019 is going to be far less interesting than what's happening in Iowa in the presidential primary. And so the definition of the Democratic Party, the hopefully congressional Democrats and the incoming governors were really important. You know, it's likely 58 to 60% of the country could be governed by Democratic governors after this election. So not just our image, but what actually happens, they can play a big role in 19. But once you have a nominee, that is your party identity. And so you really got to think of it as a two-act play. Because what happens next year in the very beginning of 20, and then once there's a nominee, they have it. They are the Democratic Party. And they'll set the agenda.
So in 2016, we saw a movement among some demographic groups, white voters, suburban voters, the Trump, Obama voters. Where are they going to be? What are we seeing about that group, those groups for the midterm? And then what new groups you referenced, young voters, you referenced Latinos. What new blocks of votes are going to move the needle this midterm election?
Well, listen, at the end of the day, you know, politics and the mathematics of it is pretty simple. You want to maximize to the fullest extent everybody who's no threat to vote for your opponent. So it's just, can you get them registered? Can you turn them out? And then obviously there's a group of voters that's dwindling, but is truly, in the Obama campaigns, we didn't use the term persuadable or swing. We called them up for grabs. And this is probably where analytics became most important, is to really understand who truly, because if someone says they're undecided, in a lot of races, a lot of those people truly aren't undecided. So who truly is undecided? And who do you believe, based on your positions and their demographics and their attributes, you could acquire? And so that's the battle for the so-called swing vote. And so you have to do both in any campaign. Any campaign who says, which one should I prioritize? You have to prioritize both. You have to have the money and the time and the operation to do both and to measure them. You have to do both. And so I think the question is, in an off-year election where Democrats always struggle with turnout, is younger voters, Latino voters, African-American voters, some blue-collar Democratic voters who vote in presidential years, can you have higher turnout amongst them than in 14 and in 10? And I would even argue in 6, because 6 was good. Students like, what are you talking about? That was like 12 years ago. But the Democrats had a really amazing year in 2006 after George Bush got reelected. And they had pretty good turnout, but they won largely because they just dominated the middle. Like the swing electorate had turned against the Republican Party. So they have to get great turnout. Because the Democratic Party clearly has an opportunity in this election. The question is, can they seize it? They've got a playing field that should allow them to win back the House, maybe win the Senate, but keep it super close, and win a ton of governor's races and a ton of state legislatures. So probably the most important factor in that is actually turnout. But then there are swing voters, and not all of them are Trump-Obama. Some people didn't vote in the presidential, some were Clinton who were undecided, some were Trump. But those voters, they seem like a mythological creature. They exist. And I think you see, Scott Walker's race in Wisconsin, the governor's race in Ohio, the governor's race in Michigan, the governor's race in Florida. You see some of those folks returning back to the Democratic Party who were with Obama. So, but that's what it is. Like, if you're running for Congress or governor or Senate or county exec, it's really that. You have if you're a good campaign, you have a very good sense of, here's the number of persuadable voters that are truly available to us, and what's our goal for them. And everything you're doing, the ads you're running, the speeches you're giving, where you go is based on that. And then you have an equally important campaign plan for turnout. And, a lot of states now you're starting to have voter registration deadlines already passed, so that phase of the campaign's over, so it's can you maximize turnout. And again, I can't overstate it. If you go to Nevada or you go to one of these congressional races here in California, and it's an organized campaign, and they give you a walk list of 25 people you're going to go talk in 4 hours, you're going to come across 3, 4, 5 people who aren't sure if they're going to vote or not. Think about that. That's why volunteer, it's important in presidential years too, but there's so much low-hanging fruit right now. People who are registered who just aren't sure they're going to vote. And, ultimately, that's what these races are going to come down to, because I bet you do have, I don't want to, 2 dozen, maybe 30 House races that will come down to a few thousand votes. I mean, I ran the DCCC way back in 2000, back in like an analog world. And, we picked up a couple seats. I think we ended up down 4 or 5 seats, so it was really close. And if you look at the closest races, so we talk about Hillary lost by 70,000 votes because that was the margin in those 3 upper and Midwestern states. We lost the House by about 520 votes. So it sounds like a trite expression, but it's not. If you have an inclination, by the way, Republicans who have, those races could flip the other way too. So you can make a difference out there.
So I'm going to give the audience a chance to ask questions, but maybe one more from each of you, and then we'll turn it back.
So to follow up, David, on your last comment, a lot of our students have seen the movie Selma and the power of the Voting Rights Act, 1965. And in the last 10 years or so, one of the Republican Party's key strategies was to basically eviscerate the Voting Rights Act, to make it harder to vote for people of color, poor people, young people, seniors. And in Georgia, the guy who's running a Republican candidate for governor is the Secretary of State, who's already trying to get rid of like 150,000 people voting. So how do Democrats overcome this incredible campaign that has been pretty successful of passing all these obstacles to voting for the very people that you just talked about need to vote for the Democrats to win?
It's such a horrific, diabolical, anti-democratic, sustained, cynical effort that's happening. So I'm going to start by saying, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the seriousness of this? Like, it's a 10. I do think for a party that undeniably needs to do better with younger voters and minority voters over time, it's a curious strategy to be telling them that you don't want them to participate in the election at all. So it's kind of like, I think they're going to do very, very medium and long-term damage. But, so what do the Democrats need to do? So first of all, you win state legislatures back to change laws. There's about 8 million reasons why the Supreme Court and judiciary is important. This is another one. And you elect governors. And so you do 2 things. If you're successful, you try and roll back some of the outrageous attacks on voting rights. But also, like, there are still states that don't, like, New York is not as easy to vote as it should be. So any Democrat, I mean, I would argue anybody elected anywhere, but right now this seems to be a partisan question about how easy we should make it to people vote or not. Like, longer early voting periods, vote by mail, automatic voter registration. Like, this isn't just like the bad stuff. There's a lot of stuff we know will make a difference, and we should make it easier for people to vote. So be as aggressive as possible there. And then, sadly, like, it's hard. Like in 2008 when Obama won, to your point about 10 years, there have been very little restrictive voting laws passed in states. By 2012, a lot had been. Why? to make it harder for us to win an election. So we did everything we could. We filed lawsuits everywhere. In states like Ohio, we were successful in getting the old rules returned that were really important for early vote. But we also just had to deal with it. So again, I don't want to undermine the seriousness, but like, you got to figure out a way to win, even if the obstacle course is outrageous and indefensible. That means you got to raise more money. You have to have more volunteers. You got to remind people not just to vote, but bring voter ID. You got to remind them that, hey, last time you voted, you could vote over 3 Sundays. Now you can only vote on a Sunday. The early window period's been reduced. Like, all this is more money. It's more friction, and the degree of difficulty goes up. But no excuses in politics. Got to win. So the degree of difficulty higher. So, and listen, ultimately, I think at the end of the day, I mean, you know, the last thing we're going to do in this country on mobile devices, the very last thing will be to vote. Think about that. I mean, I think that's the most important. And a lot of security issues, but there's, like, we bank and we do legal documents and we diagnose and we do everything. And so for me, that comes increasingly important, which is what's the ideal state? And the ideal state is that somebody can vote in the comfort of their home. The California ballot takes a little more than 30 seconds, but in some races, 30 seconds. And so, but we're a long way from here to there, obviously. And so Democrats have to be extraordinarily aggressive about fighting back, but then also, when you have the steering wheel, do everything you can to empower people who want to vote. So, and like a lot of parts of our economy and society, California is a good model. So you have automatic voter registration here, but in many states. And it should be the law in as many states as possible.
And we have pre-stamped mail, vote by mail, which was something that took a long time because it's expensive to pay for the postage, but makes it so much easier than having to go find a stamp when you want to vote by mail. Last question for me is about 2020. So midterms happen. If it's a Democratic win in the House, those hearings happen. There's a whole lot of stuff that comes out as a result. Does that lead to a primary challenge for President Trump? How does that coalition hold together in the face of that kind of onslaught? And then what does it mean on the House, on the Democratic side, for those 30 candidates? Everybody in the Senate thinks they're now qualified to be president. They always do. And so you get a whole lot of other folks who want to claim victory because they've been out campaigning for all these various candidates who won.
Well, on the Republican side, I mean, there's some people who are mentioned as potential primary candidates, like Governor Kasich or Senator Flake, but Trump's support in the Republican Party is extraordinarily strong. Extraordinarily strong. It's a real thing. So, you know, I think folks saw, like, you know, that was, it turned out to be maybe not a lot of Hall of Fame players in the Republican race last time, but it's considered a pretty strong field. And he kind of had his way with him in a way that I think surprised a lot of people. And so I think it's unlikely. I mean, I think the most likely reason he'd get a challenge in the primaries, if some reason there was an economic collapse, we went into recession more quickly than people thought, that might destabilize him. But, you know, we don't know what's going to come out of the Mueller report, so there may be things of such significance and serious that even Republicans have a second look. It would have to be a very high bar in my view, just because I think there'll be a reaction against whatever it is and say it's partisan and it's a witch hunt and it's all these things, and no rally around him. So I will say historically, when incumbent presidents have a primary challenge, it's a really thorny, problematic thing. And so Bush, Obama, Bill Clinton avoided primary challenges. It was really instrumental. We worried a lot about it, and we were popular, but you know, you got to deal with it. But George H.W. Bush obviously had a primary challenge from Pat Buchanan. That was very destructive. Jimmy Carter had one from Ted Kennedy. Gerald Ford had one from Ronald Reagan. All those folks lost. So the White House will do everything they can to avoid it. On the Democratic side, listen, I mean, I think I have a lot of friends thinking about running, and so I'm retired from politics, but to the extent I'm off to give advice, you know, people want to know, well, how's it going to play out? I have no earthly idea. Neither do you. You could be the next president. You could come in like 9th and drop out after the Iowa caucuses. I don't know. This is like a huge field. And we have no idea who's going to show strength that's unexpected, who looks strong, who weakens, what Democratic primary voters want, what the state of the economy is. Are we entangled in a foreign policy problem beyond what we are? We don't know. So you got to, like, there's the abyss. You got to leap into it. And I think it'll be fascinating because I do think we're going to have a lot of current elected officials, former elected officials, people from business. And, my view is that's great for voters. And I can't describe to you how difficult running for president is. Most people come out the other side much less than when they went in. It's an obstacle course of indescribable pain and difficulty, and you are revealed who you are. And so some of the people we think are strong now may not make it through. Some people we are surprised have it. Like all I can say is like sit back, and if somebody speaks to you, get involved in their campaign. But in terms of like when will we have a sense of like who's the top 3 or who's the top 4? Is there going to be somebody who is a threat to run away with it? We won't really know that till the end of 19. And so a lot of people have some really big decisions to make. And it is a big decision. Because if you run and you win and you count the campaign, that's 10 years of your life. That's no small thing. Being president does aid you in ways that are quite visually available to everyone. And it's a really tough job. And you shouldn't run because you want to beat Donald Trump. Like, that's not the right reason. I mean, that can be a reason. But you need to run because you think you can, you have something unique to offer the country in that job. And if you can't answer that question, you shouldn't run. But there's also the personal toll. And obviously, like with social media, with investigative journalism being decentralized, like you have anything in your background, it's going to come out. So you got to be comfortable with that. But also, you got to be ready to deal with Trump. Okay? Like running for president used to be considered like a symphony or a concert pianist, or there's these debates, and like this is Mad Max Fury Road, and that's the way he likes it. Okay, and he's very skilled at it. He's very skilled at it. Doesn't mean you need to do that too, but you got to be ready for that. Like whoever the next nominee is has to be compelling and exciting and genuine and smart and capable and all the things. They also have to have tough. Now, again, that doesn't mean you have to get in the ring. Like, boxing, I guess this is a dated, boxing not very popular, but, used to be. And, you had to have a strategy. Were you going to try and slug it out with a slugger? Were you going to do rope-a-dope? Like, what was your strategy? Because it's not fighting, it's boxing. And I think the same thing's true with our nominee, very few people on the planet could out-Trump Trump. But you got to understand, like, what's his strategy, how he's going to, like you see right now, like, I don't know if it'll pay off, but, like, he's everywhere. And I think he's doing that because he believes that that sucks up oxygen, and they're clearly concerned about Republican turnout. It's probably pretty smart. I mean, he's everywhere. I mean, I don't know if we've had a president in a 2-week period be this visible in the media. And, there's probably some downsides of that too, but, you should always assume that, like, your opponent has given a lot of thought to what they're doing. I think sometimes in politics or in business we say, well, that's a dumb idea. I don't know why they're doing that. Well, they think it's the right idea. So better think about why they think that is before you automatically criticize it. So, but I think the Democratic field is going to be fascinating. And this is not a prediction, but I wouldn't be surprised if the person who emerges is somebody maybe only 5 of us in this room talk about now would predict. It also could be somebody we know very well. Like, I don't know, but I do think there's a hunger out there for something new and different. So I think someone will play that role and be in that lane and have that opportunity. But we also have some strong, more traditional candidates like Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden together probably start the race with 40, 45%. So it's a fascinating race for that standpoint too. I don't mean each, total.
So we have time for 3 or 4 questions. I'll let David.
Yeah, and I'll be quick.
And then Connie will
Yes.
hand them the microphone.
What impact do you think moving the California primary up to March from June will have on presidential politics in 2020?
Fascinating question. We don't know, but it will have one.
It didn't work last time.
Well, so again, it depends. Like if there's somebody in the Democratic primary that ends up winning the first 4 early states, and they clearly look like it won't have much. But if you've got 2 or 3 candidates who are heading into March, it could have a big impact. Now, if there's 2 or 3 people and they're relatively close, you're going to split the delegates relatively equally. So it may be less a delegate story than a momentum story, but it'll matter. And, campaigning in California is about as different from campaigning in New Hampshire as Iowa as possible. The other thing about California is obviously you're going to have people voting as those early states are happening. So back in '08, our assessment is we won election day vote here in California, but we were so far behind Hillary when the voting period opened, we lost the vote by mail pretty significantly. So fascinating question. And there may be other states that move up. Legislatures obviously next year, some will take a look at this. And so incredibly important. It's a great question. I mean, there are some scenarios won't matter much, but if you have a competitive race with 2 or multiple plausible candidates who are heading into that next gate alive and plausible nominees, it'll matter a great, great deal. The other thing I think that will matter a great deal if you were to look at California and then, the candidate that wins a plurality, much less a majority of the African-American vote down south, when you get into Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. So as you think about the primary, it's hard to say who would have appeal now, but that you'll begin to get a sense that's going to be incredibly important. It's hard for me to say, well, we have a Democratic nominee that loses California, or at least loses it badly, and underperforms in the South. Anything's possible these days, but it's unlikely. So somebody who has strength down south in those states has a distinct advantage. At the end of the day, that's what protected Hillary against Bernie Sanders' strong run last time. And that's what allowed us in '08 really to get momentum and take a lead, was we began to rack up big wins down south. You also have some California candidates running, maybe a gazillion of them, so that's going to be interesting too.
Hello. Oh. What's your view on the future of the Electoral College, whether it's still necessary?
It's a great question. I'm going to answer this first like a political egghead. So, of course, instinctively to me, leaving aside the results of 2016, instinctively it makes sense. We should go to popular vote. And so I personally support that. It would change the nature of our campaigns, which is probably a secondary. Right now, if you're a Democrat or Republican candidate, you spend time in the heartland. You spend time in Virginia, North Carolina. You spend time in Colorado, Nevada. If you were just trying to acquire the most popular votes, so having, been responsible for a couple of presidential campaigns, we'd go to Houston, we'd go to LA, we'd go to the Bay Area, we'd go to Philly, we'd go to Miami. So it would make our races much more extreme, which is probably not a good outcome. So I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I think my sense is, again, this is where young people make a difference. I mean, I think my guess is young people, even more than my generation or some of the others, that thing makes no sense at all. Why are we doing that? So obviously it takes a lot of states have obviously passed legislation. And so that's another place where the outcome of these elections could be interesting to see if more states add to that. So just as a political practitioner, you'd get a much different race. But my guess is the calls for both reviewing that and changing that will continue to grow. But here's the thing: the Electoral College is the rules of today. So you got to win by the rules, right? Got to win by the rules. Winning the popular vote, it's a nice talking point. You don't take the oath of office. You got to win the Electoral College until we change it. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. No, go.
Sorry. So I have a question. What would you say to people who are, especially younger generation and women, who are discouraged about the Kavanaugh hearings and what went down, and just learning about how much a story cannot matter to a lot of men in the country? What would you say about our future and looking at the Supreme Court and how little hope so many of us have?
Well, I completely understand that reaction. It's a reminder that we think we've come further than we have in some respects. And I have a young daughter, and I think about the message that sends her. It's just not okay. So the option is, I think, discouragement, being upset, being almost fatally resigned is okay for a little bit, but the only option is to change it. So let's put more women in office. Let's make sure that, if you have a particular point of view that you don't want more Kavanaughs, then you've got to win the Senate, win the presidency. Because I hope this isn't true, but there's a decent chance by, let's say, the end of 2024, you'd have at least 2 more vacancies. So court could be 7-2 in one direction, 5-4 in another. These are big stakes that will last with all of us, but your generation for at least 2 or 3 decades. So you got to change it. You got to change it. I think it's at moments like this when you're the darkest that we all get tested. What happened was infuriating. And I was joking about white men, but I do think what's happening right now is it may be the last gasp of the patriarchy, wanting things the way it was. Right? So Make America Great Again, some of that was based on a view that, after World War II, the economy it kind of worked for everybody. If you stayed out of trouble, go to college, not, like, people want that again, our economy's changed. Some of it is racial and misogyny, but some of it is just like the people who ought to be in charge shouldn't look like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Okay? And so we got to, and I think there's a lot of conservatives who don't like that either. Like, we got to fight back against that. But again, it all comes back to elections. It all comes back to elections. Who gets nominated for the Supreme Court? Do they get confirmed? Who controls committees? It all comes back to elections. And so I think the Kavanaugh hearings will be with us for a very, very long time. Some of that will be motivation for people to fight back, but also it'll be understandably deeply concerning for folks. Like, can they be believed? Can they be heard? I know for me, like, I had a really hard time for a couple of days there, and I'm much less affected than women in this country because I just couldn't believe it. And it's like 2018. So, but if you care about the Supreme Court, got to win the Senate back in 18, hopefully, or 20, and you have to win the presidency. So for me, one of the, again, my political persuasions are known. At least 46% of the country disagrees. So I'm going to just speak to my persuasion. Like, if you had had 16 years of Democratic presidents, you almost certainly would have had a 7-2-8-1 court. And that was a big, big deal, bigger than any legislation you'd pass or didn't pass. And so that was the tragedy. I think among many, that was a tragedy. So we just got to fight back. And we have a Congress. We have a president. We're not going to change that. So the only thing we can change is who occupies those seats. And I do think that's an interesting question. Like, will so many women running this year, like, will the momentum continue? And I think it will, in part because of that. I think it has to. And, like, one of the saddest things I was on election night, amongst about a million other reasons I was sad in 16, was I was just so excited, having worked in the White House, to think about for the first time we would have a woman chairing a Situation Room and sitting at the Oval Office, making decisions through the eyes of a mother and a woman. And we've never had that. It's absolutely crazy that we haven't had it. And even if you don't agree with that person who's doing everything, to have that perspective, this deep in our country's history that we've never had, that's a tragedy. So hopefully that'll change. So that's not an endorsement for anybody in 20, but it was probably the thing I was most upset at. That's the thing I was so excited about. I thought Hillary Clinton would be a good president, but I'm like, to have a woman sitting at the Situation Room and at that desk in the Oval Office and making calls in part through her experience as a woman, I think would be so powerful. Hopefully that day will come very, very soon. No, of course. Thank you. Thank you. That was fun. That was fun. Okay.
knock on doors. You've got 3 weeks.